go. There we go. I think I've got it now. I was going to make a statement that would be outrageous. I was going to say, I think I've got it together. There's no getting it together with me. Donna, you know that. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Louis B. Free Radio Show, Brain Food from the Heartland. Returning to the show, Donna Andersen. We spoke last time about her book, Senior Sociopaths, How to Recognize and Escape Lifelong Abusers. Lovefraud.com. Of course, we've got the links up. We'll go directly to lovefraud.com. Donna, welcome back.
I'm so glad to be here, Louis. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm delighted. And I'll always ask you this, but for new listeners, a little bit about yourself, your background, if you would.
Okay. Well, I am the author of Lovefraud.com, which is a website that teaches people how to recognize and recover from sociopaths. And I'm also the author of 8 books. My most recent book has just come out. I'm sure Louis will allow me to hold it up. It's Senior Sociopaths, okay, How to Recognize and Escape Lifelong Abusers. And I got into this endeavor, I guess you could call it, because I was married to a senior sociopath. The guy was a complete con artist, wiped me out financially, cheated on me with multiple women during our marriage. And then when I discovered his history, it was even more outrageous. And none of his behavior made any sense to me until I was talking to my therapist about it. As you can imagine, I needed some therapy. Sure, and she said, he sounds like a sociopath. And I'm like, sociopath? What's that?
What's that?
Yeah. And that's when I started researching it and discovered that, yes, my ex-husband did fit the mold. And my background is journalism. I was the original editor of Atlantic City magazine and then became a commercial copywriter, but I never anticipated that I would write a book. People would say, "Are you going to write a book?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, no, that's too much work." But then I realized I had a story to tell. And so I did. And I launched Lovefraud. And it's kind of been a mission ever since to educate people about the millions of sociopaths who just live right among us.
Oh, and I know I've asked this before, but a little bit about a sociopath. I hate to say like define it because I know it can be broad. But
right.
If you would.
Yes, for sure. I define a sociopath as someone who has a serious personality disorder in which they exploit and manipulate others. Now, the terminology is actually very confusing, which is why people struggle with trying to understand what they are. And essentially, it's like this dispute in the mental health field or the psychology field, in that there are people on the one side who refer to psychopaths. Those are all the research psychologists. And then there's all the clinicians who need to follow the American Psychiatric Association. So they use the terminology antisocial, narcissistic, borderline, or histrionic personality disorders. They're called cluster B personality disorders. This is all way too complicated. And the term sociopath actually is no longer an official diagnosis for anything, but it originally meant anything deviated or pathological in social relations. So I'm going back to the original term and the original definition and discussing all these people in general, because they're all bad news. They all are manipulative and exploitive, and we need to know that they're out there.
Sure do. And again, I've talked about your book. We spoke last time, Senior Sociopaths, How to Recognize and Escape Lifelong Abusers. Again, lovefraud.com. The author, Donna Andersen, is my guest. Donna, the book was just coming out when you were on with me. I think it was pre-order still when you were on with me in April.
Yes, yes. It was. It was before we actually published.
Before it actually, yeah. What has it been like for you since the book has been out?
Well, I've done a lot of interviews and which is great. And I appreciate the opportunity. And the feedback that I've gotten has been that it just is totally right on the money. People are recognizing their situations in the book. They're appreciating how I define what the what has gone on in these situations. And the book is filled with stories, filled with case studies. And that's what's really striking a lot of people. It's really hitting home, because I do have a lot of statistics and analysis of what happened, but it's the stories in the book and the anecdotes and the quotes that are really painting the picture of what's going on in these situations.
For you, again, helping people and helping people understand it, because I think a lot of people, when you were on with me before, and since that time, when people have read the book, they felt that one of the things I get is like, I thought it was just me. Do you get that a lot?
Oh, yes. In fact, because there is so little conversation about this in the general society, and when people find themselves in this situation, they don't understand what it is. They don't understand what's going on, because you expect people to be a certain way, and this person, whoever you're dealing with, is not that way. And I hear it all the time. People feel totally isolated. And of course, a sociopath does that to you intentionally, to make it so that it's difficult for you to escape their clutches. But people do feel like they're the only one this is happening to, because the stories are so outrageous, and the behavior that this person is engaging in toward you is so outrageous that they're like, nobody can believe it. Yeah. In fact, they try to tell their friends or families, and the people are like, oh, you must be exaggerating. Oh, it can't be that bad. And, so a lot of people definitely feel like they're the only ones this is happening to. And that's one of the things that has been helpful with lovefraud.com, because people come online, they read the stories sound like exactly what they're going through. And it's very validating that, no, they're not crazy. Yes, this is happening. And it's not me, it's them.
And that's one of the things I've heard over and over about people, that when you were on with me, and again, once people started reading the book, they thought it was just them. It's interesting. And there's so many out there. When you write about senior sociopaths, let's talk about, as parents, and what they sociopathic parents. Am I saying that accurately?
Sure. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I did in this book is that, first of all, it's based on research. It's based on surveys with about more than 2,000 Lovefraud readers. And I asked them to describe their experiences with someone who was age 50 or older, and who they believed was a sociopath. Now, they could talk about anyone that they wanted in their lives. Most people talked about their spouses or romantic partners, but I did get people who talked about their parents, their siblings, their other family members, work colleagues, business associates. And this is important, because people need to understand that disordered individuals affect everyone in their lives. It's not just their romantic partner. And so one of the chapters, as you mentioned, was about parents. And there were actually a couple of different storylines through this chapter. One was how when sociopathic parents treated minor children, who were still in the household, they had kids who were 10, 11, or even younger, whatever. And then I talked about what happened when sociopaths, when the children grew up and they still had these disordered parents. And this, I found, in my view, was probably for me, it was the most powerful chapter in the book, because it really showed how people are affected from a young age, when they have a disordered parent, and how, whatever level of abuse they had. I mean, sometimes it was physical abuse. I did have somebody report, being burned with cigarettes and things like that. But a lot of it was emotional abuse, and psychological abuse, and negligence, and a lack of caring. And just people talking about how it affected their entire lives is very important to understand, because if you've been in this situation and you finally come to the realization that the reason that you're struggling, that you're anxious, that you can't seem to have good relationships in your life is because of what you experienced when you were young, it's real important to recognize what the source of the problem is, so that you can recover from it. And so I've got lots of data on what happened and also some pretty powerful stories about what folks experienced in these situations.
Very powerful stories. And again, the book is Senior Sociopaths, How to Recognize and Escape Lifelong Abusers. Again, you can go to lovefraud.com, lovefraud.com. Donna Andersen, the author, is my guest. So share with us a little bit more. Again, these are lifelong abuser. I mean, this isn't something that, how do I want to say it, people heal from or recognize. This is who they are. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, yes. And that's what's important to understand, because well, that's actually the reason that I wrote this book, is because there is this perception in the mental health field that sociopaths burn out. I mean, in their 40s. And I certainly didn't experience this, because my ex-husband, who swindled me and cheated on me and all his other outrageous behavior, well, he was 55 when I met him. Of course, he lied about his age too, but he was 55, and he continued to take advantage of women after I divorced him. So when the psychologist, I mean, this is actually written in some psychiatry textbooks, that sociopaths burn out in their 40s and engage in less antisocial behavior. And it's just not true. And that's what I documented in this book. And that's why it's so important for people to understand this, because if you are involved with someone like this, especially those in romantic relationships or marriages, I mean, I have people who told about their experiences, and they've been married for 20 and 30 and 40 years. And, they keep waiting for this person to calm down or grow up or mellow out. And it's important to understand that this is not going to happen. If a person has one of these very serious personality disorders, it doesn't go away. There is no treatment that is proven to cure them. So you have to look at this situation and decide, do I want to spend the rest of my life with this person, or how am I going to move forward? And this is the key purpose of the book. The key purpose is to educate people that they do not change. And with this information, how are you going to live your own life?
When Donna Andersen, we talked about that before, and you write about it, that idea of burning out. I just never understood when we talked about it. Again, when you write about it, how would they think that would happen? How would therapists think you just all of a sudden you change? I don't get that. And
right.
You've exposed. Go ahead.
Yes. So that's one of the topics that I do discuss in the book. And essentially what has happened is that I think that a lot of experts have conflated what happens with criminals and what happens if, somebody is disordered but is not a criminal. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of the research about sociopaths and psychopaths and antisocial personality disorder is done with criminals, prisoners. And the reason is because they have access to these folks, and most of the research done on these topics are done with either criminals, prisoners, or college students, because those are groups that researchers can access. So they didn't have the kind of data that I had. They didn't have the access to all these people who were telling their life experiences. So what has happened is that it is very well known in the criminal research field that people, as they get older, tend to engage in less crime. In fact, going back like to the 1800s, they knew that the prime ages for people to commit crimes was in around 20, from late teens until about 22, 24. And then looking at the data, criminal behavior, or at least for arrests and convictions, just totally drops off, after that age. And so essentially they looked at this crime data and saw that criminal arrests and convictions dropped off. And because a lot of the research on these disorders was so tightly interlinked with criminal research, they just kind of made this extrapolation that, well, they're engaging in less crime, so the disorder must be going away. And that's not necessarily true. So there's a lot of flaws there. One of which is that other researchers have now found that the diagnostic criteria that works for people who are young doesn't necessarily work when people are old. And also there may be more criminal behavior among the older people than is recognized. One of the other things is they've gotten smarter, so they know how to engage in criminal behavior and not get caught, or figure out that they don't want to go back to jail, or they've learned how to talk themselves out of it or something like that. So essentially it was bad data and bad assumptions. And that's what I have with this book, is actual data that shows that the behavior does not abate. In fact, most of my survey respondents said that the behavior was just as bad or worse as the sociopath got over the age of 50.
It's very interesting. And again, how you describe them in the book. And again, the stories are very, very powerful. Let's talk a little bit about parenting. And again, it goes through the lifetime. Obviously, the parents start when the kids are young, and there's different ways that sociopaths behave with their kids. Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, actually, one of the things that I did was collect data on what the sociopaths do. And I asked about their treatment. In fact, a lot of different people could provide this information. There were folks who actually had children with the sociopath. They provided information. There were other family members who provided information. There were perhaps neighbors or people who just were able to observe the parenting behavior. And so I collected, what typically the way they treated the minor children. And the top way trait that was described was that these parents were cold and indifferent to their children. Like 26% of respondents said that. Then others said that they were abusive and harsh. 24% said that. Then another thing was that they would be inconsistent and fake and superficial, and 17% said that. There was a lot of lies and manipulation. They actually lie and manipulate their kids, so that was a thing that went on. Another thing that went on is that they treated the children as objects or possessions or extensions of themselves. They were controlling and in some cases actually enabled the kids to be derelict and delinquent. A lot of them, about 11% reported that these disordered parents engaged in parental alienation. And what that means is that they try to drive a wedge between the child and the other parent. Then also, one of the things that often goes on in these situations is that you have the golden child and scapegoat phenomenon. And what that means is that the sociopathic parent will treat one child as, the princess, so to speak, and then the other one as the slave or as the scapegoat for everything that goes wrong. And, so this is very typical as far as what went on in these parenting situations. And this was reported by all kinds of people. And it was eye-opening to see what these folks the kids actually experienced when they were young and had these disordered parents.
And that recognition of it doesn't happen until they get older and start to look around, correct? And see that other parents. Tell it. Go ahead.
Right. And one of the things that I discovered that I thought was really interesting, and this was just doing the data analysis, was that, as I said earlier, I had all these different groups of people who were reporting and who were answering these questions. So what I did was I noticed that the kids themselves were reporting far more abuse than the people around them. Like, for example, if a woman who had a child filled out the survey and about what she observed her sociopathic ex doing to the kids, well, she didn't see all of it. And on all these measures, what the children themselves reported was worse than what the people around them were able to observe. So that means that even when people are seeing that the parent is engaging in bad behavior, they're not seeing all of it. And what the kids are going through is even worse.
Tell me a little bit more about that. About the
kids. Yeah, I mean, because what we did, it actually, it got real complex. So it's in the footnote in the back of the book, where I have all the charts as far as what happened. But I asked about, specific types of abuse that they experienced, for example, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional or psychological abuse. And the children who experienced it themselves just reported this at higher levels than anyone who was on the outside observing it.
And it continues. Again, as you were saying before, Donna Andersen, this isn't something, they don't burn out.
Right.
Again, that whole idea of people, that was kind of, when we first spoke about that, it's kind of odd that they would think that all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm not going to be that way anymore. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know what the assumption was. And we talked about it again earlier, but it continues throughout as these kids obviously mature and become
Yes.
young adults and then adults.
Yes.
Talk with us about, go ahead.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what happens, is because those who stay, because one of the things that happened is quite a few kids, I think the figure was about 18%, finally said, forget it, I'm done with this person. And, they break off all contact and they're totally estranged. But those who remain, essentially, sometimes they're treated like children for the rest of their lives. They're expected to be slaves. They're expected to, take care of the other person, to their parent, and the parents are just still pulling the strings, even when they're, married and have their own families. I remember one particular story where a woman, had like 3 little kids of her own. And she was expected to still go back and clean her mother's house every day, and carry the firewood up the porch and things like that. So, in some cases, the parents just still expected to be waited on, by their adult children. And then there was actually what showed up more when they were adults is this whole scapegoat and golden child phenomenon. I mean, some of that went on, when the kids were younger, but more of it showed up when they were adults, where the sociopathic parent would favor one child over the other, depending on like who's doing the most for them at the time. So it for those who stayed involved with their parents, it typically was just as bad as they got older.
And breaking free, talk with us about the young people, and I mean younger, the kids, even of course as adults, breaking free from that.
Yeah, well, some even as children, decided that they didn't want to see this parent anymore. Quite a few, as they were older, decided that, forget it, I'm done with this person. There are a few cases, the child turns 18 and that's it. She's out of there or he's out of there and won't have anything to do with that parent anymore. There were cases of kids who changed their names. If they had a disordered father, they didn't want to have his name anymore. I think in one situation it was like, 2 of the 3 kids actually changed their names. So it all depends on, what their opportunities are. But the key is, again, to understanding that there's something wrong with the parent. Now, this can be difficult because if you have grown up in this situation, that's all you know. I mean, you don't know that, that there's something wrong with your parent, unless of course you're being physically beaten or something like that. But, since a lot of this manipulation is psychological and emotional, it's like you really just don't understand what goes on. And one of the things that does happen in these situations is that because of what they've endured as children and the wounds that they've suffered that are never addressed because they don't know that they're wounds, they don't know, how to deal with it. Often what happens is that folks who had disordered parents end up with disordered partners, because, they have this, it looks familiar to them. And plus, they have these internal wounds that they've suffered because of the situation. The wounds are not addressed, and the wounds just throw off this energy that other sociopaths latch onto. It's like amazing, because the wounds create a vulnerability. And here comes another sociopath who promises to take all the pain away and make everything better. And unfortunately, the person falls for it, and then they find themselves in another trap.
When you in the book, Senior Sociopaths: How to Recognize and Escape Lifelong Abusers, Donna Andersen, I mean, there's a large percentage. Let me check 38% actually considered or attempted suicide. That's
Yeah.
again, people need to understand how serious this is. And
Yes, yes. And one of the things that is also important to understand is that if we're talking about marriage situations, for example, there were people in my book who, as I just said, got involved with another sociopath. Maybe they had bad parenting, maybe not, but they got involved with them while they were young, maybe in their 20s or 19, 20, early 20s. And I broke out the people who got involved with a sociopath while they were young compared to those who got involved with them while they were older. And those who got involved while young definitely suffered more. They lost more money, they endured more bankruptcies, they lost their home, and even on the suicide measure, more of them considered suicide because of the experience than those who got involved at a later age. So that's another thing that needs to be looked at.
It's horrific. When you were going over some of the stories that people wrote, what was that like for you? Again, you experienced it. What was it like for you hearing from others?
Oh gosh, some of them, it's just heartbreaking. I mean, I had thousands of stories, literally thousands of stories. And, it was like, it was just like, oh my gosh, some of the things that were the stories that they told me what was going on. Like, for example, going back to the parenting, the one story that I led off that chapter with was about a family in which the family was actually very wealthy. The mother had inherited all kinds of wealth, generations of wealth, and it was the father who was disordered. But he had this great job. He was a university professor, very well respected. And they had one child who was disabled when born. In fact, she wasn't expected to live, but she did. And she turned out to be very brilliant intellectually, but had no social skills, because of the brain condition that she had. So the family decided they didn't want to risk having another disabled child. So they adopted a couple kids. And the person who I interviewed, who told me the story, was the son who was adopted. And the father was a complete psychopath. And he tormented, the disabled child and the son, from the time they were little. I mean, they were dragging the son into therapy when he was 6 years old. There's nothing wrong with the kid. Of course, nobody, the parents aren't saying him, oh, we're emotionally and physically abusing him. They never told that to the psychiatrist, and it was just a lifelong thing for them. But what happened was that at one point, the son went to college, suddenly found freedom, away from his father, and cleaned his act up because he had been started being rebellious, because of the situation. But he cleaned it up, and then he was about to get married, and his grandfather died, leaving even more money to the mother. And so all of a sudden, the father decides that, well, he's not going to work anymore because he has to take care of his wife because he's driven her crazy by this point. And so he starts managing the money. And essentially what he was doing was using his wife's wealth to create this image of himself, of, this philanthropist, where the whole time he was still abusive to his son, still trying to paint his son as the black sheep. They had an 80th birthday party for the mother, and they never told the son, so when he didn't show up, they say, see, he's the bad son. It went on forever. But the thing was, this was a family of means, and the sociopathic father used that money to insulate himself, to create this image. And, he got away with all of it.
And again, people don't see it on the
Right.
outside. That's the other thing. Like you said, university professor, different. They don't see it. People don't see it. They don't know what's going on behind those closed doors.
Right. Yes.
And when you, again, with lovefraud.com, a little bit more about breaking free. Again, these kids, you can't fix somebody else. Excuse me, Donna. Sorry. You got to fix yourself.
Right. Yes. And it's a journey. And the first step in the journey is to recognize that someone in your life is disordered. And that's really hard, because we don't know about it. And that's why it's so important for people to educate themselves about it. But once you've come to the conclusion that someone is disordered, what you essentially want to do is establish no contact. I mean, you have to get the person out of your life. Now, but no contact means no contact. You stop talking to them. You don't let them into your life. Now, this may or may not be easy to achieve depending on the type of relationship. If you're just dating someone and you figure out what it is and you can cut it off and go away, I mean, that's perfect. But if it's a family member, or if you finally figured it out after, 20 or 30 years of marriage, then things are more complicated. So I actually do address that in the book, because the last two chapters of the book, one is dealing with sociopaths, and it's, more information from the survey respondents of exactly how they dealt with all these situations. And the chapter 9, which is the last chapter, is about recovery from this experience. And what needs to happen is that you need to be able to set boundaries as best you can if you're not able to get the person out of your life. There are quite a few people, who were married for all this time and financially they can't do it, or for family reasons or whatever. So what they do is that they figure out a way to live their life independent of the other person. This, of course, assumes that they're not being physically abused or something like that. So they figure out a way to just, do their own thing and have an independent life. The real recovery, though, is emotional. And I talked a little bit about that earlier, because what you need to do is recognize these terrible emotional wounds that this person has inflicted and allow yourself to process the pain of those wounds. And that means allowing yourself to cry, allowing yourself to express anger appropriately, which means not at that person, because that's useless, but you need to get it out of your system. And so I talk about, how to do this a lot with folks, as far as, how to really access those really deep wounds and release them. Because if you can do that, you can get past it. I mean, you can overcome the pain that you've experienced. You can move on, and you can, make the rest of your life be what you want it to be,
as opposed to staying stuck, staying miserable.
Yes.
That. And again, there's all different types. You write about it in the book, Senior Sociopaths, different types. Like you were saying, some could be physically abusive, emotionally abusive, combinations, etc.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about your website, lovefraud.com, if you would.
Okay, sure. Well, I actually founded Lovefraud back in 2005. And so it was one of the first websites on the internet to discuss sociopaths and this topic. There's thousands of articles, people telling their stories, more information about how to recognize different types of behavior that sociopaths engage in. We also have a lot of webinars that are presented by both myself and then other experts, therapists, different experts on, how to recognize and recover from sociopaths. And we also you can get my books there. And I also have a YouTube show that there's lots of videos that you could take a look at, as far as, me explaining a lot of these situations.
Again, it's lovefraud.com. You go directly to lovefraud.com. We'll link them up from louisfreeshow.com, wfmj.com. Senior Sociopaths, folks, you may see yourself in the book. And I've heard people that were reading it that had the light bulb go off and say, wow, some point in their relationship, be it parent or whatever, they recognize, we probably all know a sociopath. Is that Donna Andersen? Is that a fair statement?
I would say so. Yeah, there's just too many of them. The numbers are really kind of frightening, because if we look at all the people that I describe as sociopaths who have those disorders, antisocial, narcissistic, borderline, histrionic, or psychopathic. No one really knows how many there are, but the estimates are like massive. Depending on the study that you look at, it could range from 5.5% to 17.5% of the population. So if we take a midpoint of like 12% of the population could have one of these disorders, well, that means in the United States, we live among 31 million adults who are sociopaths. And they're everywhere. They're all throughout society. So yeah, I would say we probably all know sociopaths. We just don't realize that we know them.
I'm getting a number of emails to talk more about narcissism. Maybe we can do that next time. But again,
Okay.
I love talking with you, Donna. It's so enlightening for people. Get the book, read the book, Senior Sociopaths, How to Recognize and Escape Lifelong Abusers. Donna Andersen's book, again, lovefraud.com. Let's do it again, please.
Okay.
I always
Thank you,
enjoy
Louis.
talking with you. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, again, the book is available and you can go to the website, go to lovefraud.com would be your best